Hi, my name's Phil Craig. I'm a writer, a TV producer, a lover of stories, and a connoisseur of scandal. And I'm on a mission to bring you the most scandalous tales ever told. So thanks for joining me here at the Scandal Mongers Podcast. Well, after 2 weeks, I am back. Did you miss me? I hope you did. I missed you. I'm going to have to get back to doing one a week. I think I need it. I have lots of things I want to say, lots of people I want to talk to. But actually, for the summer, it's quite nice to have a slightly more relaxed schedule. Yeah, lots to talk about. What are 2 weeks? More book stuff, more holiday history report, and some serious developments on some of the stories we've been following over the years now as well. Where to start? Let's start with the last episode. 8,000 views. Pretty good, huh? 8,000 views on YouTube alone. Don't know how many listens. Quite a few more, I think. So that's going to be a 10, 12, 15,000 download episode. Me, Jill Hornby, Jane Austen. I hope you enjoyed it. A lot of you did some lovely comments. Really appreciate them all. Read them all. Try to respond to them all if I can. Hello, Olivia Schnepf. I'm guessing you might be German, Olivia. I think you've been on here before. She really enjoyed learning all about Jane Austen and loves those kind of novels, social criticism. She reads lots of Balzac. Yeah, we have a very highbrow literary fan base for this podcast and likes the way Balzac talks about the big figures of his time. And you can see we can learn so much of them from today. She says Macron, President Macron, for example, is a Rastignac. I think that means like a social climber, a sort of slimy social climber. I don't know. I have not read too much Balzac, but I have read a lot of Jane Austen. Elizabeth Neal, 3825. Hi, Elizabeth. Really enjoyed Jill Hornby's knowledge and the easy rapport you had with her. Well, I did feel nice. I really do like chatting to my guests, as I hope is obvious. And Jill was a delight to talk to. It's just a lot of fun. Kari B61X talked about Dawlish, because I've been in Dawlish. I think I mentioned this last week, doing a talk about the book. Of course, Dawlish figures in the book, because my mother-in-law Jennifer is from Dawlish, and we went there together, and it was very sentimental and a lot of fun, and a lot of people came. And actually, Kari would have come, but she didn't know about it, because she lives close by. Well, next time I'm down in Devon, Kari, I will let you know. What else has been happening? Oh, yes, Mrs. Craig responded to the opening. I'm going to try and share my screen. I started last week's episode, fortnight ago, with some potentially ill-advised dance moves, otherwise known as twerking. So this is what Mrs. Craig did in response to that. Stop! Twerking free zone. She's absolutely right. But of course, I'm not the only member of my family who likes to show off, because about a day after that episode, we went to the theatre. And we went to see a production of a play called Ernest. It's a sort of comedy about a production of the importance of being earnest. And in the play, one by one, various members of the cast drop out. And so people from the audience are invited to volunteer to take over the roles. It's really, really funny. I thought, I've got a low embarrassment threshold. I thought this could be a bit cheesy. It was brilliant. And of course, guess who stood up, put her hand up to be Cecily, perhaps the most important female role after Mrs. Bracknell, Lady Bracknell. There she is, Mrs. Craig, on stage with a professional actor having the time of her life. She was brilliant. It was a good night out. So yeah, I'm not the only member of my family that likes to show off on stage or screen or indeed the internet. Let me try and get myself back into full view. Here we go. Serious stuff first. I don't know if you, not a hugely popular episode actually, but my conversation with Julie Bindel about the very serious subject of child sexual abuse in Britain, the gang-based version of it, in which almost always working class girls from northern British towns were perhaps initially seduced, certainly then coerced into a life of basically child prostitution and traded and pimped and horribly abused and then not believed. And this has been a running sore in British life now for 20 years. Julie was one of the very first people to draw attention to it. And she ran into some terrible opposition, both in the media, when she was a very well-established left-wing feminist, lesbian political activist, but she nevertheless fell foul of, hate to say it, my old newspaper, The Guardian, turned on her and others who were making these claims and said, no, this is just awful racial stereotyping, because almost all of the people in the gangs were British people of Pakistani origin and slightly clan-based societies, so it was very hard to penetrate and find out what was going on, and people didn't talk. And it's taken a long time to get anything like justice for these young women, these girls. I mean, they were children, most of them. And now there's been a big demand for quite a long time for a new kind of inquiry, looking at the cover-up, looking at all the agencies that seem to have let this go on, children's homes, social workers, police, local councils, too embarrassed, afraid, just didn't want to cause trouble, wanted to keep an eye on community relations. Yeah. So that's been a big scandal. Julie talked about it. She's been pushing for an inquiry. Keir Starmer's government said time and again, no, no, no. But then a very powerful figure, Baroness Casey, came out with a very, very strong audit, really, about a week ago, saying, we still don't know why this was allowed to go on for so long. We do need some accountability. And maybe people need to be interviewed under oath by an inquiry with real powers to find out why these girls were left to suffer and how authority just didn't seem to care for them. Anyway, about a week ago, Starmer gave in. And a lot of the MPs who were saying, we don't need an inquiry, let's not stir up any more trouble, we've dealt with this. Suddenly, yes, we've always wanted an inquiry. We're going to do it. So it's going to happen. We don't quite yet know how or who's going to be in charge, what the terms of reference are, but it's a big victory for people like Julie. And if you've not heard her, it's not an easy listen, but it's a very, very interesting insight into the background of this story. And yes, and she predicted on this very podcast that in the end Starmer would have to give way, and he has. And I'm pleased he has. There's no shame in doing a U-turn if it's the right thing to do. And he knows, and this is one of the tragic things, just there have been lots and lots of Muslim commentators saying, we want this out in the open too. We don't agree with all this. It's terrible the way that some of these awful men have somehow presented themselves as victims, where they're just the worst kind of criminals. Our community needs to address this too, and this could only be healthy, getting some sunlight into those lost decades of hidden abuse and how hard it was to get any kind of interest from the authorities. So that's going to happen. That's good news. So yeah, we do serious things, we do fun things. It was my anniversary, our wedding anniversary, Mrs. Craig and I, 42 glorious years. And so we decided to go back to where we had our honeymoon in Corfu. I just got back yesterday, looking a bit tanned, do you think? I need to shave as well, but anyway, got back last night. A lovely time. When we were on our honeymoon in 1983, we met a lovely couple called Rashbin and Pete, who were themselves engaged, I think, or they were married the next year. And we'd been friends of theirs for over 40 years. And so we all went back together to the very same resort where we all met in 1983, and it's an absolute hoot. I'm going to share one picture because now I know how to do it. Why not? It seems to take me a while to find the right button to press, but there you go. Start share. Here we go. There's Mrs. Craig on stage. There we all are. Can you see that? 83. Goodness me, who is that handsome young man? Rashbin, Pete, myself. There we are last week in exactly the same beach, looking a little bit different. And here's the really soppy sentimental one. There we go. 83, just married. 2025. Same place, same water. Oh, I know, soppy, isn't it? But there you go. It's a mixture on this. Personal reminiscences, interesting journalism, and great stories, and a lot of fun, I hope. What else to talk about? Yes, well, we've done the grooming gangs. Well, I haven't even introduced the show, so I tend not to know, but hopefully you've read it. It's quite a coup. Clare Mulley is going to be speaking in a moment about a Second World Story. You know how I love my World War II. Oh, yes, I should say, my book. Yes, it's doing quite well. Had more talks booked. I'm going to be at Chalk Valley next week, the 26th of June. Some other bookings are coming in. I had an article, I'll put it on my Twitter feed, printed in an Australian military history magazine, a very nice review actually also from a very highbrow magazine called Engelbird Ideas, which is read by a lot of well-connected literary people, a really good review. So I put it on Twitter. And more things for my Australian tour in October. I think I have 7 events now in about 9 days in 4 cities. I'm going to be exhausted, but of course I will love it. So yeah, books are still out there if you haven't given it a try. Maybe you should. 1945, The Reckoning. It is attracting a lot of attention, actually. And this review in this highbrow magazine pointed out that it deals with these culture war issues of empire and how we should teach empire. And, we're living in an age where we are interrogating our history and which statues we should pull down, which ones we should keep up, and how we should deal with some of the more difficult aspects of our colonial past, especially here in Britain, but not just in Britain. So, that review pointed out that I managed to attract endorsements from both sides of that because I'd written a book that was fair, but also quite strong and I do call things out. I mean, I'm very strong about things like the Bengal famine, which takes place in India during the time I'm writing about. But I just try to make the case that all the bad things of empire and the good things of empire, then you can't separate them. The reason Britain was able to do amazing things at that time was that it was an empire. Even if some of the things we did in 1945 are hard to justify now. Anyway, 1945, The Reckoning, still on sale. Please give it a try. Clare Mulley, she's written lots of books, actually, a bit like Helen Fry, who was a big popular guest on this show. She's looked at women in intelligence, the sort of untold stories of women in the Second World War. And she lucked out with this story, which she's going to be talking about today. Agent Zoe, a remarkable story of intelligence, resistance, intrepid behavior, incredible courage, all set in Poland. Well, Poland, Britain, occupied Europe. And she's found a completely new hero, something I'd never heard about. And her book has been widely acclaimed. And she's talking at lots of festivals too. More than me, I would think. But I shouldn't grumble. I'm on a few. But no, she's great. And I think that's probably quite enough from me. We'll talk to Clare, and then I'll be back at the end with more updates on what's coming up next here on the Scandal Mongers podcast. So for the moment, thank you from me for listening and sending best wishes from the Australian bar. Okay, thank you, bye. Clare, thanks so much for joining me here at my Australian bar on the Scandal Mongers podcast. And
how nice. A bar, lovely.
Did. So, Agent Zoe, oh my goodness, I know you've talked about this book now quite a lot. Oh, snap.
Thank you for having it.
But I wanted to, start at the end in a way, because as somebody who's also written a little bit about the Second World War and met some survivors and veterans and interviewed them, there's a great moment, actually, in your notes on sources, where you suddenly, you can tell the story when somebody says, "Do you want to hear her voice?"
Oh, yeah, it was just amazing. This is the moment I knew I had enough material to write the book. So I was in the World War II Museum in Gdansk, and I'd been interviewing a man called Andrzej Dzierżyński, and he had been a journalist in the communist era of Poland. And he brought this plastic carrier bag with him to the interview, and we chatted for, a couple of hours, I think. And then he suddenly brought this bag, put it on the table, and he had a tape deck, an old-fashioned tape deck, still with a Solidarity sticker on it, and a load of tapes. And he stuck one in. He said, "Would you like to hear her voice?" And I was like, "Of course!" It was amazing. So, so he put a tape in, and there she was with this sort of soft Pomeranian accent telling her stories. But she would sort of choke up with emotion at some points. And then another time she'd just laugh. She laughed a lot. She had a great sense of humour. Another time she was banging the table so much I could hardly hear her. And then the tape clicked to an end. This sort of clunk happened. And then this martial music bled out across the cafe of the museum. And he quickly sort of scrambled to turn it off. And I had to say, "Andrzej, I just didn't think you were a marching band kind of guy. Can I ask what that music is?" And he said, this was the communist era. This was in the 1980s, and he'd been interviewing her. And it was considered seditious to interview someone who had been a resistor like her anyhow. She was regarded really as an enemy of the communist state in Poland, which was this Soviet-backed imposed regime after the end of the Second World War. And they had arrested her. I mean, the great irony of those stories, she's a hair's breadth from being caught by the Germans so many times. But she is never arrested during the war. And she serves from the first minute of the war right through to the end. And then in the post-war period, she's actually arrested by the Soviet-imposed communist regime in Poland. So he wasn't allowed to interview her. And in fact, blank tapes were illegal, he told me, in communist-era Poland. And he found the best tapes to record. He was doing this for history, for posterity. He he found that the state tapes were the best one. You could put a bit of sellotape over the top,
Hmm.
board on top of them. And so the best quality tapes were the state ones. So he had literally recorded the testimony of this freedom fighter over the propaganda of the communist regime. It
That's
couldn't
really
be
fitting.
more.
It's really fitting. Oh, I think I've lost you. Hello, Claire.
Hello,
Ah,
can you hear
hello.
me?
I can hear you. Do you know what? The video was very jumpy. Maybe it's best if we just stay with audio. What do you think?
I would much prefer that. I hate seeing it anyhow. Can we just carry on like this?
Let's just carry on like this. It's fine.
Okay.
The audience, if they want visual stimulation, can look at my bar. Um, so yeah, no, well, you've heard her voice, and my goodness, you've done her justice. But I have to confess to a certain amount of
Thank you.
professional jealousy because it's not often anybody stumbles upon a story this good and this fresh with material that is, you're working with it. I'm almost everything I'm guessing for the first time, and it's that's why it's such a wonderful and exciting read, I think.
Yeah, it was really thrilling for me to discover this completely unknown heroine. And of course, there's a reason for that. I mean, most of the women's stories haven't been told as much. There's a few that stand out that we do know, like Violette Szabo or Lauren Yat Khan. But there is a lot of the work on the women hasn't been done just because they're women. But with Zoe, there's another layer on top. At the end of the war, she was actually demobilized as one of the most highly decorated women in Polish history, but she didn't receive any of her honors for another 40 years because the communist regime made damn sure that her story was hidden. It didn't fit with the triumphant narrative of the Red Army coming down and liberating Poland, who'd done nothing for themselves. This woman's endeavors and achievements were so great, they couldn't let that spoil their narrative. So they deliberately kept it from going into history books. And that's why, it's a massive cover up. That's why we don't know her. So it actually felt like a real privilege to bring her story back.
Well, let's start at the beginning because I mean it's an incredibly rich and remarkable life. We'd never cover it all in 40 minutes or whatever we've got. But so
Yeah.
she's born. Well, do a pen portrait of her leading up to the war. The sort of woman she was, the sort of skills she already had that sort of fitted her out for her wartime to come.
Yes. Okay. So, well, first of all, perhaps why she's such an important figure and who she is. Amazing childhood. So just so people know, Zoe is really, that's her nom de guerre, her wartime code name. Her real name is Elżbieta, which is the Polish version of Elizabeth Zawadzka. And she was the only woman to parachute from Britain to Nazi German occupied Poland during the war, the only female member of the Polish elite special forces, and much, much more. So where did she come from? Well, she was born in a town called Toruń, which is in northwest Poland, which is a traditional historic Polish city. And she was born in 1909. She was the seventh of eight children. I think that probably helped her a little bit because she was used to fighting her corner, trying to get some parental attention. In 1909, when she was born, that was actually annexed into the Prussian Empire. So you have to remember that Poland has this history of centuries of being invaded and occupied and bits of it annexed off to its aggressive neighbours, but also centuries of defiance. Her hometown was in the Prussian Empire, so an earlier German empire, which meant that legally she was actually born German, not Polish at all. And her first language, because the Prussian Empire was trying to culturally cleanse, I suppose, the area, Polish was forbidden. So she had to speak German. So she grew up speaking German, Germanized. So at home, she was a Polish Elżbieta, but in public, she was Lisa or Liesel, the German version of Elizabeth. And of course, what the Prussians didn't realize that they're doing is they're brilliantly training, providing a perfect sort of legend for a future agent to serve against them, because she is totally fluent, bilingual, totally fluent in German. She's never going to get tripped up on a German custom or tradition. And above all, she's had a double identity since she was knee high. So she's quite prepared to live her life through two identities as a special agent. It was perfect.
So the war begins. Sort of rushing ahead because there's so much to cram in, and almost from the beginning,
Yeah.
she's at the heart of action. But I guess what's maybe most extraordinary is the way that she somehow becomes the confidant to some of the leading figures, not only in the war, the generation that's fighting the war, but then the people who go on to kind of fight the war from outside Poland and the resistance, which is much more
Yeah.
extensive, I think. I don't think I'd ever quite realized how much the Poles never really gave in at all. and continued to fight. And she finds herself really at the heart of that very quickly. Why is that, do you think?
Well, she actually starts serving in a uniform at the very start of the war. She's up and in uniform and in action in the early hours of the 1st of September 1939. So probably one of the very first women to serve in the Second World War. But within a couple of weeks, so the 1st of September, Poland is invaded by the Germans from the west, but just 17 days later, they're invaded by the Soviets from the east. And I won't go into all the details of that now, but Poland realized that they couldn't continue to fight on effectively on two fronts. So they took the strategic decision. They never actually capitulated, but they moved their armed forces out south through Romania to regroup in France. And Zoe was one of the people, among many things she was doing, she was helping to keep the route open through a city then in eastern Poland called Lvov, which is now Lviv, of course, in Ukraine. And she could have gone out with the armed forces. They got out 35,000 troops. And that's just one of the Polish armies that would serve in the Second World War. And a number of women did go to serve as secretaries and drivers and so on. But she thought there was more in her and that she should stay and help support the fledgling Polish resistance, which became known as the Home Army, as opposed to the armed forces overseas. And so very early on, she sets up a women's intelligence network, gathering and couriering military intelligence from across Silesia into the Home Army headquarters in Warsaw. She is the lead courier on that. I think she kept count. She crossed wartime borders, like the border between Soviet-held and German-held territory in Poland, over 100 times, because we know she stopped counting when she got to 100. She thought it might be unlucky to keep counting, but she kept doing the job. So she's playing a very key role.
What a very dangerous game to be in at that time. Or any time.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the book is full of these examples of her nearly getting caught. I mean, early on, she's traveling on papers called fingers, because the identification on them was just a fingerprint. Before they started, very quickly, they started using photographs as well, and then the Poles would start forging them. But at this point, she's traveling on stolen fingers at the start of the war, and she is carrying a bundle of money, and she has to hide it on this train because she realizes suddenly they're doing very thorough checks going systematically between the carriages. And so she manages to hide this in a vent in the toilet and then sits down, but she's quite flushed. She has a bit of a tell. She goes bright red when she's stressed, which is not ideal. She told friends, "I was sweating like a mouse." I just love that phrase. She uses it. It's a Polish phrase. And they think she looks flustered, so they take her off for further checks with a group of other people at the next station. And she has no idea what's she going to do. Her fingerprint isn't going to match that on the stolen papers she's using. Mm-hmm. So she thinks she could run for it, but quite likely they'll just shoot her. I mean, there's no concern about preservation of life here. So she just goes to the back of the queue and she waits till everyone's fingerprinted, and then she puts her finger on the ink pad. And then she just sort of discreetly doesn't put her finger down on the piece of paper while they put the ink pad away, lock the desk drawers, sort everything out, shoo everyone back. And then they realise she hasn't done it. And they're like, Schnell. And as she puts her finger down, she just smudges the print. And they can't be bothered to get the ink pad back out of the desk and everything. And that's just one occasion. That little movement, that saved her life that day. And there are, 30, 40 times this quick thinking will save her in so many.
No, I have to say, I'm sure you're bored of receiving praise for your writing, but there are so many occasions where you really do feel, she's going to jump from a plane. She's on the run. There's a great story where she's remembering a cowboy film, I think. And
when she has to throw herself from a moving train.
Jumping from a moving train. Apparently in cowboy films, there's a technique. If you jump towards the wind in the opposite, the direction of travel, it'll mean your landing is not so bad. But I mean, it's just, you're absolutely with her at that moment. And it's so compelling. She's
so brilliant. I love the fact she's leaping from a moving train to get away from the Gestapo. And she thinks that, I'll take a tip from the cowboys. They jump up to slow down their momentum. And she said it didn't work at all. She just smashed down. But she wasn't caught by the Gestapo. She hadn't broken her legs or anything. So she kept going. So yeah, she's got this wonderful sense of humour as well, which I love.
No, well, you've captured that as well. I mean, I think that train jumping story is part of her great trek, because again, slightly accelerating through the story, she's sent on this amazing mission all the way from Poland to Gibraltar so she can get to Britain, which, I mean, that must have been extraordinary.
She is the only woman to be made the personal emissary of the commander of an allied army that I have found. So the head of the Polish Home Army at this point, Stefan Krotrowecki, appoints her to be his emissary. So that's his personal representative, to undertake 2 missions in London and to take 2 very important microfilm, one hidden in a key and one hidden in a small brass cigarette lighter, which is a brilliant bit of kit. You could light your cigarette without destroying the film inside. It was wonderful.
Incredible.
And so she has to cross nearly 1,000 miles of enemy occupied territory. So first, she has to go right into the heart of the Reich, into Berlin itself, and then get the train out, cross the border near Strasbourg, where she's nearly caught in an Allied bombing raid. Well, she is, but she makes it through, manages to get into northern France, again, nearly captured when her now forged, very excellently forged papers are the people checking documents there just think there's something about them, and she has to spend a night in a hotel and come back in the morning, but she gets away with it. And she hides. She has a terrible time with trains during the war. She hides in the water tender of Pierre Laval's personal steam train. So he's the collaborationist prime minister of France.
Yeah, incredible.
She rightly thinks there'll be less checks on his train, so she hides in the water tender. She thinks no one will be, and then no one will think of that, and she meets 7 members of the French resistance in there.
Oh my goodness.
They're nearly drowned when they have to stop to take on more water. She gets thrown out of a hotel window into the snow. She gets shot at in the freezing mountain passes of the Pyrenees. I mean, you just couldn't. It's all in the files in Poland, in various archives, a bit in the British archives, because eventually she does make it, then across Spain to Gibraltar, and hitches a ride on a troop ship and gets to Liverpool and then London on May Day, 1943. She's extraordinary. And she's the only person sent out with these courier films, with these films, that makes that distance, and the films aren't taken from her.
And if that wasn't enough, because I think you probably could have retired at that point and said, "My war service is done." They trained her to go back into Poland on a parachute. Basically.
Yeah, well, actually, they didn't want to. They said, "Thank you so much. We want to honour you. Do you want rooms in London or somewhere else?" And she's like, "What are you talking about? I've got to go back. I've got to serve my nation." And they said, "Well, that's very noble, but this is after she's undertaken her missions in London, of course." She said, "You can't go back because there's only one way to go back, and that's to parachute. And well, you're a lady." And she's like, "Immediately get me some trousers," and undertakes her parachute training. And she's the only woman to pass parachute training from the Polish section. So she becomes the only female member of the elite Polish special forces. They're called the Cichociemni, which means the silent unseen. And she parachutes back in the face of considerable flak on her special duties squadron flight back. And she's determined to take part in the national uprising, which becomes the Warsaw Uprising.
And she's right in the heart of the action for that, isn't she?
She is. I mean, the whole of Warsaw was immediately pretty much the front line. It's this horrific engagement, actually took 2 months. And the fatalities are appalling, but the courage, the human spirit of defiance is legendary in Poland now. And it's an engagement we should all know much more about. And she's right.
I'm sure you've seen this yourself many times. I've been to Warsaw a couple of times, and yes. I went to this meeting in this TV office, and it's inside a building where they kept the exterior with all the shell holes and the bullet holes, and they just built the other building inside it. And everywhere you go, you see that occasion honoured, and it's amazing how the Polish people remember that time.
There were so few buildings left standing at the end, because afterwards the Germans just came in with flamethrowers and demolished what few remained from they sent in the Luftwaffe in full force and bombed everything out of that city.
Well, betrayal and treachery is a theme of this book, and of course of Polish history. And as many people will know, while this was going,
determination and courage as well. Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. But the treachery of the supposed allies. The Stalin stops the Red Army. He lets the Germans destroy the Warsaw Uprising, because even then they're thinking of these guys. They're going to be unmanageable. But it's good to have the leadership killed by the Nazis.
Yeah, that's basically right. And then, of course, they continue after the end of the war. Poland is left with this Soviet-imposed communist regime, and the first thing they do is round up the resistance leaders, and they come in goodwill and are just sent to Moscow for a show trial, and none come back. And then they start on the next level down. And by the 1950s, even in Britain, we began to realise finally that women did serve with weapons in hand behind or on the front lines. Women in the Special Operations Executive. And Poland, they realise this as well. So in 1951, she's arrested after the war by her own government, or I don't think she'd have recognised them as her government. It was the Polish communist government, and the Polish government, the wartime government in exile, is still continuing in London in defiance.
Well, I really want to get to that, but I need to ask you, how does she escape Warsaw? I mean, you said the flamethrowers, the Luftwaffe. She gets out somehow, doesn't she?
She does. She and a group of other women. This book is a biography of Zoe, but it also tells the story of about 5 other women and 2 of the men that they all end up serving together alongside each other in the Warsaw Uprising. But they've all interacted, and many of them have been good friends in between during the previous chapters, the previous history. And so she and a woman called Emilia Malesa, who she'd been working with, are told to regroup in Krakow if they can get out. And Zoe's actually given one of the last orders from the commander-in-chief of the Home Army at the end of the Warsaw Uprising. But from there, she goes to Krakow to re-establish the resistance and the courier routes and the communications that they've been running. And yeah, I mean, it's amazing that the Germans are getting anyone left hidden in the city. So civilians were hiding, sheltering as much as possible in cellars and basements. And they were now bringing these people out. And most of the women went out. I mean, one of Zoe's great achievements is that she secured the legal status of women as soldiers in the Polish Home Army. And previously, women weren't considered soldiers. So they were, if they were found by the enemy, they were either shot immediately under Hitler's commando order as bandits, or were, tortured quite brutally and then sent to be laboured to death. And they weren't surviving either way. But because they now have legal status, they get protections under the Geneva Convention as soldiers, just female soldiers. And so it's the only time in the war that Germany sets up prisoner of war camps for women. There are so many women, it's estimated around 12,000 women served in the Warsaw Uprising alone, that they have to set up 2 prisoner of war camps. And this saves many, many thousands of lives.
That pressure, that bureaucratic pressure actually saves thousands of lives. Wow.
Absolutely. So you can put that down to Zoe personally. And she, of course, could have gone out with her head held high as a soldier going to prisoner of war camp, but she decided there was more fight left in her. So instead of doing that, as the Germans filter the women out, she pretends to be a civilian. She's in civilian clothes. She walks with them, but she and her friend Emilia find a German truck that's going out because they're stealing anything that they can use, any metal, any scrap that they can use to take back to Germany. So they manage to get under the tarpaulin of this truck and hide under loads of horseshoes it's carrying until they are driven out of the city towards a depot. And then they manage to sneak out when the German soldiers go out and get some lunch and a few beers. And eventually, there's much high drama everywhere, eventually get to Krakow and re-establish communications with the West.
Amazing. I mean, it's naturally filmed because I have to ask, will there be a film?
Well, I am talking to someone about it at a production company at the moment, so fingers crossed. Yeah, I hope so. I mean, this is a story we should all know much more.
We certainly should. And any actress would give their left leg to play this part, I think. Good Lord.
Yeah, I don't need to. She had both legs. Unlike one of these women in the SOE only had one leg, but yeah.
No, it's an incredible story. So one of the most incredible parts, and there's quite a lot in your book about this, is after the war. I think it's fair to say she's kind of prepared to give the communists the chance. I mean, she works in the education system, but inevitably, perhaps, she finds herself through her friends and her connections. Would you say she was a spy? She knows sort of pro-Western agents, and inevitably that means she ends up being arrested and horribly treated. I mean, do you think she did give the communists a chance?
Well, I think she's a very practical woman throughout the war and afterwards. So, initially she's thinking of maintaining resistance. She does consider it for some time and do a small amount of work. But she has been in London and she knows how far down on the priorities Poland is at this point. So lots of Poles who had served in the Home Army in the resistance, which was a massive and highly organised, structured system. They are still thinking either the war hasn't ended because Britain came to war to liberate Poland when they're invaded. And at the end of the war, Poland is left with, peace but not freedom. They are still occupied, but this time by the Soviets, and they end up with this communist regime installed on them. So they think the fight is ongoing, or they're waiting for the Third World War. They're waiting to change this. Zoe realizes, because she's been in London, she's got that broader perspective. She knows how few resources there are. She knows how little support there will be in America for further war. It wasn't going to happen. And so she decides the best thing she can do now is work to rebuild her country. And she's prepared to do manual labor or whatever it takes, but her skills are in teaching. She was a teacher before the war. And she rather brilliantly sets up almost the equivalent of the Open University in Poland, long distance learning. So she's doing really important work, but the communists are harrying her and harassing her throughout, and eventually they ruin her career, and finally they arrest her, in fact more than once.
Because she's been meeting with one of the leading, I guess, agitators for
Well,
outside the country, who ends up being killed, I think, executed.
yeah, she's invited to a meeting with one of the leading anti-communist resistors. She doesn't know who she's going to meet, but an old friend says, "Can you meet another friend?" And she goes to this meeting, and she's known this guy. She had met. He's in the Warsaw Uprising, and they have this little moment in between bombardments where they have a kind of peaceful discussion, looking at all the newsprint and discussing what a future Poland could look like. And he becomes a future leader. So she knows him already. And he asks her to join the resistance. And she says, "You're a fool. It's not going to happen." And she refuses. But just the fact that she had met him, plus the communists, when they search her apartment, they find a $10 bill, a $10 note.
Right.
And it was illegal to have foreign currency. I mean, this is an old note that was stuffed inside a cotton reel during the resistance days. It's not something that she could have ever used in the communist period. But that gives them the excuse. And they sentence her to 10 years in prison.
Gosh. And how does she survive that?
Well, she doesn't stop fighting, obviously. I mean, one of the extraordinary interviews I did was an interview with one of her prison cellmates. Absolutely extraordinary. And she said she was describing how Zoe, her cellmate was a much younger woman, a teenager, in fact, when she was imprisoned for doing a little bit of resistance in school. And she said that before Zoe came, there was massive suicide rates. These girls, imprisoned girls, were slashing their wrists and drinking lime and couldn't survive. And Zoe empowered them. She taught them. I mean, she literally taught them. She gave them lessons in maths and geography and so on. But she taught them to have self-pride and self-worth and to maintain their self-respect. And did fantastic work in the prison. I mean, she never stopped fighting throughout her whole life, really.
Amazing story. I don't know whether I don't think she serves the whole of her sentence, but she's still very much kind of, even after they release her, she's seen as an enemy of the state, and her career is basically finished. But of course, her life and her struggle is far from finished.
That's right. I mean, yes, they do release her about 4 years early because, Stalin had died and there'd been a bit of a thaw, and it was convenient to them at that point to do so. So yes, she is released early, thank goodness, and tries to go back to teaching, but it's just appalling the way they treat her. Her career is on the rails. And at one point they do allow her to take a flight to London, which is shocking, to go to an educational conference. So she goes, she doesn't go to the conference though. She takes this list, largely that she's kept in her brain, of hundreds of women who she thinks their service should be recognised. And she writes the list, scribbles the list down and takes it to the Polish government in exile, still in London. And all these women are put on a list to receive honours. I mean, they can't receive them yet, but she ensures that their service is recognised. And ultimately, of course, all these women are honoured after the fall of after Solidarity. And Zoe fights with Solidarity as well. I mean, she keeps fighting.
Gosh.
And
so this is her second visit to London, and once again she decides to go back, and she doesn't have to, I assume.
She does. She returns back to London after meeting a friend, including one of her friends is Sue Ryder. People might know that name. She was she shared a room with her during the war, so she goes and sees Sue Ryder. And then eventually she does come back to Poland. She flies back, and they arrest her at the airport, and they'd always intended just to see what information she'd try and bring back. And they still, among all the information they take off her, all the stuff she's brought from the copies from the archives in London, whatever she could get at that point. And they also take her PhD paper and everything. I mean, they completely take every opportunity from her, and then she's on continuous surveillance. So, yeah.
And so Solidarity happens, and she's is she a member of Solidarity, or is she just a sympathiser?
She's a very active supporter. I didn't find a membership detail. Doesn't mean that she wasn't, but she's very active in her support for Solidarity. And I finally, after the hardback came out, I got an interview with Lech Wałęsa, and he remembered her as extraordinary.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I mean, it was just fantastic. After Solidarity came through, she'd been very active in Torun, her home area, which is close to Gdansk, which is obviously it was the docks at Gdansk where Lech Wałęsa came from. That was the fulcrum of this movement, and so she's been important in that. And he honours her with Poland's highest award, the Order of the White Eagle. But apparently, she didn't look too impressed by that. And he's a bit like, oh, what can I do? So he realizes what she may really want. And he promotes her from the honorary rank of captain, which she'd had during the war, to brigadier general. And when she dies, she's only the second woman in Polish history to be a general, brigadier general retired.
It is so lovely because throughout the book, so many of her friends and relations, people she knows well, they're either killed by the Soviets, like at Katyn Forest, or some of them end up in Auschwitz. They're all falling by the wayside, but she lives to a ripe old age and gets to enjoy, if that's the right word, quite a good few decades of freedom after the fall of communism.
She does, yeah. I mean, that whole the run up to the war, and the war is 3/4 of the book. That's the heart of the book. But I thought it was really important to cover the communist era. I mean, she's still fighting for freedom, and its Poland story is almost encapsulated in her life story. So yeah, the last few chapters are about this period. And I mean, I didn't dwell that much on old age, but there are some wonderful anecdotes from there, which I just couldn't resist putting in. And then, she really only stops fighting about 2 weeks before she died. And she has this moment where she's eating tinned peaches, which she loved, and listening to Chopin, which was this Chopin, of course, was this Polish composer, and he's really important to their patriotic story. So there she is, just in this happy moment at the end. But I have to say, not all her family die. There's her younger sister, Clara, whose story is woven through. She survives and marries afterwards and so on. So it's not all upsetting. There's real tragedy in there, and some terribly sad moments, but there's also some real joy in there as well.
You say it was lovely to hear her laugh when you heard her voice. Some of the people in your book describe her as being quite tough.
Well, she was tough.
I mean, could be quite hard to deal with if she didn't agree with you.
Yes, she certainly could be. She was very strong, very determined, had very strong opinions on things. She was never going to resort to being a bit flirty to get her way. She was dealing in rights and wrongs. And she was very true to her own beliefs. And you could describe this not as hard, but as leadership qualities.
Of course you could, and you should.
There's plenty of people who are inspired by her to serve because of her strength of character.
Do you think that looking across you mentioned earlier the female heroes of SOE, who we probably have heard about, carve her name in pride, and movies were made. And obviously that's because they were British and their stories were told. They weren't living under communist occupation. But it seems to me that Agent Zoe is, easily as well as worth remembering and, commemorating, and as a role model, I guess, for women in and out of the armed services. And yet, until your book, most people had never heard of her. Just kind of sad.
No, well, it is sad, but I'm really hoping to restore her back into the histories, and I hope there'll be more interest. I mean, I'm delighted that the book's being translated into Polish at the moment. She's slightly better known. She's well known in Torun, but not that well known in Poland yet. I mean, she's in a lot of the big museums, but this will be. I hope this will help. And I've just had an option for Italy, so it's going to be translated there. So it's beginning, I hope that she will become a much better known figure, rightly so.
Well, she certainly should be. And you've done an absolute justice in this remarkable book. It does read like a novel, and it's all true, which is the best, the kind of book, in my opinion. And I'm glad we carried on despite the technical glitches, because that's such a fascinating conversation.
No, I'm delighted. Thank you for some excellent questions. Really good talking with you.
Oh, you too, Claire. Thanks for your time, and I hope to see you soon. Bye.
Bye. Pleasure.
Well, wasn't that interesting? Now, Claire's a bit of a star, actually, and I think she's going to be at Chalk Valley, which is one of the bigger sort of book and history festivals here in Britain in the summer. When I'm there, so I shall go and say hello and tell her that the interview's got up. That's next the 26th. If you're around, I know a lot of you like going to book festivals. Chalk is one of those where it's like sort of, the bit of a Glastonbury vibe. There's food and tents, and people bring things to like hands-on history. A lot of people in costumes and uniforms wandering around. It's a great thing to do on a summer's day. So if you're thinking of coming, check me out. I'll be on in the morning of the 26th with my friend Rob Lyman talking about my favourite subject, 1945, The Reckoning. Yeah, and talking of favourite subjects, you may be aware that I'm a big fan of cricket, and it's now the test. The test summer has begun, and so I'm going to talk about Test match cricket with Tim Wigmore, who's written a new book. And Tim has the best job in the world, I think, which is to travel around the world writing about cricket for a British newspaper, The Telegraph, which is a paper that has a lot of cricket lovers, but also experts. So you've got to be good, and he is. And he's written this really funny book about, it's a social history of cricket, but it's also about the great characters, some of the scandals, and the dramatic. Nothing like cricket. I know many of you, if you're American, will be rolling your eyes. Oh my God, a game that lasts 5 days and can end in a draw or be cancelled by rain, played in a country where it always rains. No, it does sound a bit weird, doesn't it? But nothing builds tension quite like cricket. It can deliver the most memorable, nail-biting, edge-of-the-seat sporting drama where individuals are tested, that's why it's called Test match, tested to the limit. It really is the most extraordinary game. Anyway, as you can see, I'm excited. So in a couple of weeks, I'll be back talking about cricket. Hopefully the weather will still be nice. It's boiling hot here. I think it's hotter than Corfu, which was 32. And I think we arrived back in England, it was 32. It literally never happens. Anyway, see you in 2 weeks. Talk about cricket. Lots of other things bubbling for the rest of the summer. And then, yes, I'll be going back to one a week, probably in August or maybe the end of August. But until then, thank you for your company. Oh God, I do need a shave, don't I? I'll be a little bit less hirsute when we next meet in a fortnight. All right, all the best. Bye. This has been a Podcast World production. If you want to contact me, write to team@podcastworld.org, placing Scandal Mongers in the heading, or you can reach out via the social media links in the show's bio. And if you've enjoyed this episode and you want to support the show, please consider taking a few seconds to hit the donate button found just below this video. Many thanks, and see you next week.